Welcome to Headliners Forum. We're here to bring you the best in Texas journalism, the stories behind the great stories. I'm Mark Morrison. Our special guests are Jody, Barr, and David Barr, investigative reporters for KXAN, the NBC affiliate in Austin. The KXAN team won a Silver Showcase Award in this year's Headliners Foundation competition for their series, Bargaining the Badge. Their hard-hitting journalism uncovered how hundreds of Texas law enforcement officers accused of felonies and other serious crimes got special treatment, or at least the appearance of that. By agreeing to surrender their peace officer license as part of a deal, they often avoided jail or prison sentences that other lawbreakers might face charged with a similar crime. David and Jody, thank you for joining us and congratulations on your Showcase Award for Enterprise and Innovation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Jody, where did the idea for this story come from and what was the basic legal issue involved?
Well, the idea came from, it was actually David, I believe, started seeing plea deals across Texas, where officers were charged with crimes and that they'd end up with probation sentences or just not being prosecuted altogether. And it was always a tagline in every one of these reports that read, they would surrender their license, a permanent surrender of their license. Well, we didn't know it at the time, but we were both sort of attacking this from a different angle. I began looking through the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement's their quarterly meetings. They have an agenda and they will tell you what certain disciplinary actions they take on law enforcement officers across Texas. And I began seeing surrenders, revocation of licenses. We're talking about dozens each quarter across Texas. So one day we had just had a conversation. David was telling me about what he saw with what he was reading in these reports across the state. And I said, well, this is what I'm looking at from this other end too. And then come to find out it was actually the same issue. We just didn't realize that we were coming at it from two different directions. So it started with that. And we just, out of sheer curiosity, we wanted to know why these deals were being made. And if perhaps, this was David's early hypothesis, was, if these officers were bargaining their police licenses to dodge prison.
Right. And then, David, you really dug into the data, got a whole lot of data statewide and even some outside of Texas to see if there was some kind of trend here in what you guys had talked about. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, it started really just the way Jody described it, and I requested 10 full records of permanent surrender from the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, which keeps all the police officer licensing information in the state. And with those 10, I just kind of wanted to get a feel for what records were available, what would they provide, and what could we see if we got a full officer's file from a permanent surrender. And when we got those 10, I saw that they had a lot more than I expected. They had charging documents, they had dismissal records, they had in some cases a narrative of the crime that was alleged that the police officer committed. And we saw that 8 out of 10 of those involved a crime that the police officer committed. So I thought that was a high percentage of the first 10 we got. So we went and felt confident that if we requested a large amount, that we would be on the right track to get good records for a story. So we ended up requesting over 300 full files, full TCOL records. And then that was the beginning. We created a database out of those TCOL records. And then we went forward and also requested, court records, police records, investigation records, things like video, photographs from crime scenes, body camera, dash camera, and dozens of different cases. And I think overall we ended up submitting over 100 requests to different county and city and state law enforcement agencies.
And David, what did you find in terms of the scale of this practice of basically uh, cops who get in trouble and charged with crimes using their license as a bargaining chip to basically do better than the average Joe who commits the crime?
Yeah, we found that there was clearly a pattern of police officers and prosecutors reaching deals that they were using their police officer licenses to surrender it to reduce charges, get out of jail time, and in some cases, end investigations before any prosecution would even take place.
Right. Jody, it almost seemed like, some of these cops were getting a get out of jail free card. There's another side of the story, which you guys diligently reported as well, which is involved the difficulty in prosecuting uh, uh, cops who commit crimes or who are allegedly commit crimes in the state of Texas.
Yep, and then that caused us to look at, how other states are performing. David found a professor up in St. Louis, I believe it was, and this man had spent 40 years studying license revocations and surrenders, this exact topic across the nation. And in consultation with him and leaning on his expertise, we were able to find that compared to states to Texas were Florida and Georgia. And during the time frame that we looked for, there were 93 license revocations or surrenders in the state of Texas. I think 2015 was our data that was the latest data at that time that we had access to. So there were 93 in the state of Texas. We looked at Georgia, which had 562 during that same time frame, and then in Florida had 399. Well, the first question is how, that's a huge disparity. Texas is far larger of a state than Florida or Georgia, probably combined at that time, but we wanted to know what the difference was, and the difference boiled down to the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, before they could strip a police officer of their license, it required either a felony conviction or a very high misdemeanor conviction, and the misdemeanor was for specific crimes. What we found that happened in Florida and Georgia, for example, the reason their license revocations were so much higher than Texas is because those law enforcement commissions, their equivalent of T-Call, those bodies were able to take a police officer accused of misconduct, unethical behavior. You hear about passing the trash sometime where officers jump from department to department after they get in trouble in one. These licensing boards in those two states, they were able to meet, hear the arguments, and then determine whether someone was fit for service. In Texas, the law does not give the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement that power. T-Call, again, has to have a conviction of some sort or a plea agreement where the accused officer says, I think it's in his best interest, the officer likely would be thinking, let me surrender this license. I could never be a law enforcement officer in the state of Texas for the rest of my life, but at least the prosecution is avoided or prison time's avoided. And that is exactly what our report, the data we uncovered, and the reporting led back to that, is that if you've got a police license in Texas and if you're charged with a crime, your best bet is to pull that out, and you've got some leverage to bargain with.
Yeah. David, talk a little bit about did you get any pushback from law enforcement and prosecutors as you sought to expose this anomaly in the system?
Yeah, I think this is not an issue that any law enforcement agencies or the heads of law enforcement agencies was really excited to talk about with us. I think we went most aggressively to hold the prosecutors accountable because they're the ones that are striking the deal to surrender the license. And Jody did a good job, and we did manage to get at least a couple on camera to do an interview. But it's not, yeah, it was hard to get records. It was hard to get interviews. It was hard to talk to people on the record. And what we were uncovering, I think, surprised even the law enforcement agencies and some of the prosecutors in the fact that it was so widespread and appeared to be such a clear pattern, because they're not cooperating with each other, in different parts of the state to make these deals. This is happening in different jurisdictions all over the place. So I think they were aware of the option to do it, but they weren't aware of how widespread and how much of a pattern it was.
Yeah, it seemed like as a viewer watching this that when the prosecutors, for instance, would talk about this, they weren't particularly embarrassed about. This is something that was not any kind of law or conspiracy or anything like that. It was more something that has become common practice over the years, and in part because prosecutors did find it so hard to get convictions on law enforcement officers. Jody, this is a high impact story, but maybe a difficult one to tell on television. We've talked about a lot of data and documents. How did you make this story work from a storytelling standpoint?
Well, yeah, that's always our challenge is, how do you visualize it? So, early on we knew, and David started very early in his research trying to identify cases that would contain body camera, dash camera video. And there was one that really stuck out to David that we really pursued. And although we didn't have the video, the details of the case were so egregious, we felt like we had to tell it anyway, and we made it happen. And that involved a Travis County inmate who the extraction team inside the Travis County jail was trying to pull him out. This was all on video. And instead of firing a gas canister into the cell, they fired a pyrotechnic canister into the cell. And they caught the guy on fire, burned him very badly. So David fought for months trying to get this video. And then it became such a challenge with Travis County. We went through the open records request. We tried to invoke that law that, is supposed to provide you access to public records, but they would not give up that security video.
We're going to look for just for a moment at one of your stories about Alexis Alpha, who was a Texas State student who wandered into a crime situation. Let's play that.
This was the last time San Marcos Police Corporal James Palermo would ever make an arrest. Back in 2013, the 13-year police veteran arrested a Texas State University student who walked in front of his car during this traffic stop. What started as a lecture ended in charges of public intox and felony resisting arrest. The video shows Palermo slam the woman's face into the concrete so hard it broke two of her teeth and gave her a concussion. This wasn't the first time Palermo was accused of using too much force.
Jody, talk about that one a little bit. What happened there, and why was why did this even happen?
Well, this is a young Texas State student who an officer had pulled a gentleman over in the parking lot of a bar in the little bar district in downtown San Marcos, and pulled him over. And there were several people when the police car was pulled in behind the suspect's car that left a walkway where patrons were just crossing back and forth. And for some reason, Alexis Alpha walked by, and the officer, he was James Palermo's his name. He was a ranking officer with the San Marcos Police Department. For some reason, calls her and tells her to stop, tells her she's walking through a crime scene, asks for her ID. She began to not comply with his orders that, when you're looking back, she wasn't the only one walking through the scene. So it escalated where she called him a name, and he proceeded to body slam her face first into the concrete and, caused some severe dental damage to her and ended up arresting her. And in that case, he I think he faced he had a potential life sentence for the level of assault by a public servant on her. And the video was very clear, unprovoked. She wasn't resisting. There was no resistance toward him. He just twice her size and just slams her face first down on the ground. And, he was able to use his police license to dodge. He was indicted in that case, but he was never, he was prosecuted. I think he took a guilty plea in that case, but he was able to use his license, and he's on a 10-year deferred adjudication in that case and never spent a day in jail.
Right. So different from you or me if we'd been caught on a video doing the same thing to a young lady, I think. That's the way the story really resonates with the viewers, and you guys did a great job of bringing it to life. David, there was another one about Bobby Bennett, who was shot on a residential street in Dallas and permanently disabled after being shot. And again, the video showed that some of the cops' reaction was not really necessary. Let's take a look at that video.
Sitting in an office chair in the middle of the street in 2013, Bobby Bennett was having a mental breakdown.
This is where my son lived.
Within 21 seconds after the responding Dallas police officer got out of his car, Bennett was hit with 4 rounds of bullets. Today, he is permanently disabled.
Did your son do anything at that point to cause these officers to fear for their lives?
None.
And David, talk a little bit about how you came across that one and reported on it.
It is another one of the terrible cases that we saw. And I think it's important to note, and I didn't mention this earlier, that the crimes that were alleged or that these officers pled to in many cases are very extremely serious. We were looking at child sexual assault, altering public record, dealing narcotics to prisoners, different crimes that are very serious. And so I think it's just important to note that the things that were causing people to surrender their license permanently, which is the most severe penalty that TCOL in Texas can give to an officer, that is to permanently revoke their license. The level of crimes we were seeing was really high.
Yeah. Jody, did the officer in that case get any kind of jail time?
No, he ended up, even the video was very clear. He shows that, this gentleman is sitting in the cul-de-sac in an office chair, and the officers respond. The victim stands up, right? And then the next thing you know, a few steps later, these officers, or at least this one officer, just unloaded several rounds into Bobby Bennett. And, he had I forget what the exact charge was, but it was a charge that carried some severe prison time. But again, he permanently surrendered his license and was able to walk away. I'm almost 100% sure that was a probated sentence as well. But
David, these kinds of individual stories and anecdotes, of course, are great for television. What are some of the techniques that you use to bring all the graphics, all the data and information to a graphic form that you could use on TV?
It took a while. A big part of it was building the database out of the records that we got from TCOL, and that took a lot of time and a lot of extra record requests to fill in the blanks of how many officers went to jail, how many didn't, most didn't. And so we made an infographic basically out of the database that we created. We also made an interactive map and to show where all these surrenders were happening. And then Jody and our photographer did a good job of cutting vignettes that weren't able to with the stories, we weren't really able to get into the on-air packages. And we had some good photographs and images. So I thought those tied the whole project online together really well.
Yeah, it really did. And the viewer can go online and dig down into a lot of the specific cases herself or himself, and really follow the story that you reported. For our showcase awards, we like to put a spotlight on stories that really have an impact, and this really filled the bill. Jody, could you provide us with an update on how lawmakers have reacted, and maybe some of the prosecutors who have been involved in these apparently special deals for cops?
Well, the thing is, every prosecutor and former prosecutor involved in these cases, every one of them told us in the interviews that you see in the report that, they recognize the fact that the public would look at it and say, well, this is obviously something that, Joe Texan would be unable to do, charged with a crime. He's got nothing to leverage. They recognize that, but they said that the largest challenge that they have is that it's very hard, these are their words, to convict an officer, to get a jury of 12 to unanimously convict a police officer. And they gave us several reasons for that. But what we did during the process of this, there was a House Criminal Justice Committee. It was a member there. She's an attorney out of Dallas. And we brought what we found to her. She is a member of the Barr and involved in the criminal justice system in Texas, and also helps craft laws and vote on laws that deal with exactly what we're looking at here. Her name is Representative Jessica Gonzalez, and she had her staff go and start pulling records from the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. They were doing sort of their own legislative investigation to, find out for themselves what we were reporting. And when we left her in that interview, she had recognized the fact that there did appear to be a two-tiered system of justice in Texas, one for officers, one for everybody else. And when we left her about, 14 months ago, the representative told us that she would be looking at potentially drafting legislation that would give the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement more power to sanction police officers for conduct short of a criminal conviction, because she recognized the fact that this is putting district attorneys in Texas in a bad spot when they know, for example, they may have a bad officer. The only way they're getting that officer off the street is to negotiate a deal with that officer to give up that license. And again, that permanent surrender is forever. It cannot be undone. So DAs are having a tough time because of the theory that it's hard to convict officers on one hand. But on the other hand is, if they take it and they have to fight it in court, and an officer that they know that should not be wearing a badge continues policing, if acquitted by a jury, it's not hard to see that, there is something in the system that could be made better so that it all doesn't come down to such a high standard, and that standard is a criminal conviction.
Right. The prosecutor wants to get the cop off the streets and that's becomes their sort of priority in these cases.
Yeah.
David, one of the keys in getting a lot of impact out of a situation like this is to keep the story in front of the viewers and the follow-up and so forth. How are you guys following the story this year?
Well, the legislative session in Texas happens every other year. So in the past year, there haven't been lawmakers at the Capitol to pass any bills. They'll be back in January, so we'll be watching what the representative we talked to will do, and we'll continue reporting on permanent surrenders. Jody has a story coming up in the near future with a officer he's been reporting on in the past that has done a permanent surrender now. And we'll be requesting and updating our story on new permanent surrenders and notable ones that happen in our community. So it continues to happen all over Texas all the time. And we're going to continue to report on it. And I think the big development as far as any major changes in the law or attempted changes in the law will happen next year when the session is going on at the Capitol.
We'll be watching for those stories. Jody Barr and David Barr, thanks so much for sharing your reporting experiences. Our judges were impressed with the way you uncovered a questionable practice that we didn't know anything about and your hard digging and storytelling skills. KXAN has a great tradition of investigative journalism, and congratulations for keeping that going in challenging times.
Thank you.
From our site, headlinersfoundation.org, you can link to the entire KXAN series and to interviews with other award-winning Texas journalists. For our producer, Gary Pickle, I'm Mark Morrison, hoping to see you again soon on Headliners Forum.